One question that comes up a lot from students when I teach Old Testament is the question of Satan. Like, as in, when you read the Old Testament, where is Satan? This is a cosmically important figure in some Christian spiritual schemes, and certainly in historic Christianity generally. So, like, why isn't this character narrated in some kind of clear way? Um, and it would take a long time to unpack a story like that. What I want to do here is focus on one reference to a figure called Satan, or Satan in Hebrew, in the Old Testament that I think is one of the strangest and most difficult references in a way. Before I do that, though, I will review something close to the full gamut of references to this Satan figure, and any one of these could be unpacked and are super, super interesting. Of course, the most famous reference to Satan in the Old Testament is in the book of Job. In Job chapter 1, Job's doing fine until a figure called Ha-Satan in Hebrew, not Satan. And this is crucial because in Hebrew, personal names, just like in English, proper nouns, do not have ha, the definite article, attached to it. So whatever that author thought this character was, it's not capital S Satan, as in the kind of Christian imagination of the pitchfork-wielding king of hell, that idea necessarily, or at least not by the proper name with the capital S. It has to be the Satan, or the adversary, which is what the verb Satan means, to oppose or to be an adversary. So this adversary figure comes among the Bnei Elohim, the sons of God, or the divine council, however one wants to take that, and makes some suggestions about how things are going on earth. He comes off as something like a divine prosecuting attorney figure who's kind of searching for people to Satan, to accuse. That's what an accuser does. You got to accuse. And so when God brings up Job's righteousness, Ha-Satan, being a prosecuting attorney, is like, I don't know. I work in the prison systems of the world. I don't know if you've seen these people, the way that they actually behave. And thus begins the divine contest, okay? So Ha-Satan there has to grammatically be translated as something like the adversary, and maybe in a theological interpretation, you could make that leap and say this is Satan with the capital S, but not quite in the text that way. And it's not clear that the character even functions that way, although we could argue about this. How about some other references, though, that are less famous? How about in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, the story of Balaam and the donkey? God's anger was kindled because he, Balaam, was going away, and the angel of the Lord, the Malach Adonai, took his stand in the road as his Satan in Hebrew. So here we have one of the Lord's own agents, messengers, acting in this capacity as the Satan. How about in 1 Samuel 29:4? But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with David. And the commanders of the Philistines said, or maybe they're actually angry with the Philistine king here. I'm reading from a handout out of context. So they're angry, that's the point. And the Philistines say, send the man back, the man here being David, actually. Send him back so that he may return to the place that you have assigned to him. Because David had kind of defected over to the Philistines at this point and was hanging out with them. They continue, he shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become a Satan to us in the battle. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? So they're worried that David will become Satan, right? That's fascinating. I'll put all these references down below in the video description, of course, and you can go on a little adventure of your own reading these. 1 Kings 11, then the Lord raised up a Satan against Solomon. Who is the Satan? Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house in Edom. So notice we have multiple Satans, if you want to put it that way. We have the angel of the Lord in Numbers who stops the donkey. We have possibly David, the Philistines' fear. And we have a certain Hadad the Edomite against Solomon. Another more mythological, heavenly scene version of this comes in Zechariah chapter 3. Then he showed me, this angel that's showing the prophet things, showed me the high priest Joshua standing before the angel of the Lord and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan. Okay, so here we have another instance of the heavenly figure of the Satan, very much, maybe you could say very much like in Job, someone who's an accuser, someone who's acting in this kind of role. Again, you could make the interpretive leap and see more things there. And this Satan gets rebuked, and the guilt of the priest is taken away, and all seems to end well. So here the adversary really does seem to be something like an adversary. There are a few more places, I think, where this word Satan is used, maybe even as a verb or as a noun or something else. But these are the bulk of the references. Of course, the passages that people tend to want to see as some kind of vaguely interpreted mythological background to a Satan figure falling from heaven occur in Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, where you get various kinds of language that's pretty clear, I think, in context, that it's referring to a human king, either of the king of Tyre in Ezekiel, which is a Phoenician city along the coast, or the king of Babylon in Isaiah 14, even though in Isaiah 14 there's some mythological type language used, actually also in Ezekiel. But in neither of these cases, on at least a clear reading, does it seem that the author is trying to narrate some kind of, pre-human, angelic fall from heaven kind of thing, such as we might be familiar with through the literary mythology of Milton or in the way that this character developed through time. However, I saved up one juicy little reference to this Satan figure that I thought most people don't think about as much and is much less talked about. And it drove me to go back to a commentary that I really enjoy, one of my favorite commentaries on the Book of Chronicles, written by a scholar who taught for a long time at Penn State and also at Notre Dame, named Gary Knoppers. I had the opportunity as an aspiring PhD student to actually have a beer and some nachos with Gary Knoppers while I was exploring PhD programs at a major professional meeting, and he was just a kind soul, and would have been wonderful to do my PhD with him. I ended up not, but he was just fantastic and a really great scholar of Chronicles. So it drove me back to his 2004 Chronicles commentary in the Anchor Bible series just to see what he would say about this. Okay, so, and this is one where we get to do a comparison between Samuel and Chronicles, so adding another layer of intrigue here to this. In 2 Samuel 24, David is still just being punished. I mean, 2 Samuel is just a big punishment narrative of David following his affair with Bathsheba and the killing of Uriah the Hittite. His family goes awry. Everything's going wrong. It's a really unusual depiction of a king in an ancient Near Eastern narrative in that David is just punished and seems to be, yes, chosen by God, but also just a problem character overall. So at this point in the narrative, in 2 Samuel 24, the Lord has been angry with David, and the narrator says, again, the anger of the Lord, the Af Adonai, was kindled against Israel. And he incited David against them, saying, quote, "Go count the people of Israel and Judah," unquote. So by inciting this census, we get a little theological or ethical conundrum. God is mad at David already, and so he gets him to do something that will make God even more angry, for which God can then punish him. You could get out of it, by saying that, well, he's not punishing him because he did the census because God tricked him into doing it. Rather, the trick was actually part of the punishment, and the whole thing is a punishment, and so on. But there's a kind of a dark sense here in Samuel that the author is willing to entertain. The idea that there is just God. It's a kind of a monism or a monotheism of sorts, and it is just God that you have to deal with, not any other actor. If David sins, it's because God wanted him to sin, and if he's going to be punished, it's because God punishes him. This idea you could call, and I follow the Ezekiel scholar Paul Joyce here, you could call this radical theocentricity. It's just God all the way down. You can't blame anyone else, just God. However, here's where the plot thickens dramatically. In 1 Chronicles, we have a repeat of this narrative, and much of this is a repeat, and then there are some differences in Chronicles, as we would be used to seeing, as Chronicles does repeat large tracts of 1st and 2nd Samuel, but then also has its own differences. Chronicles narrates this as well. Again, the anger of the Lord was against Israel and incited David to count the people of Israel. No big deal. Doesn't read like that, though. The chronicler actually replaces the phrase Af Adonai, literally in Hebrew, the nose of the Lord. The nose flares with rage. Okay, that's the idiom for anger. Replaces the Af Adonai, the anger of the Lord, which is, I think an idiom for saying the Lord, with the word Satan, without the definite article, just straight up Satan. And I thought, wow, what a fascinating reference. Because on the surface of it, it looks like maybe the chronicler had a theological or an ethical problem to sort out. Namely, how do you have God inciting David to do this thing and then punishing him for it? The problem I just mentioned. Now the question is, how do we interpret or translate this word Satan just sitting there as a bare word in the narrative without the definite article in front of it? Knopper's actually made a couple of suggestions. I'm hot off of reading his commentary here, and I'll put a link to his commentary. Maybe you could track it down yourself. He says, look, this use of the indefinite noun, just the noun without the definite article, really what we should do is just leave it as an indefinite noun. An adversary, lowercase a. Who's the adversary? It's just anonymous. We don't know. So there's a kind of mystery here, I guess, that the chronicler introduces. So he prefers this to the proper name Satan. Why? He says, look, in Chronicles, we don't see any kind of dualistic spiritual thinking such that there would be a capital S Satan figure really at play for the author there. And that doesn't appear anywhere else. That doesn't appear to be a theme in Chronicles. So why would we introduce that here when we don't have to? He says basically the author in Chronicles just altered it because of the author's belief in divine proportionality, that God is not going to have David be punished for something that he didn't really do on his own. So by introducing this anonymous enemy of David, it kind of distances David in a little bit from the Lord's displeasure, because then David still can be punished and there can still be problems, but it's not really solely perfectly David's fault in the same way. He also notes that one of the Targums, which is an Aramaic translation and often a heavy interpretation of the text that was made, maybe just a little bit before the time of Jesus or during or after or something like that, that one of the Targums actually translates this as the Lord raised up Satan to do this against David. So kind of conflates both stories and kind of says, well, both of these are true. It was the Lord, but it was also Satan or a Satan or Satan with a capital S. I think there's another possibility here that Knoppers doesn't mention, which is that this idea of the Af Adonai, the anger of the Lord, is actually being interpreted here as an adversary or Satan. In other words, the idea of Satan, whether with a capital S or not, is a kind of a personification of the Lord's anger, of the Lord's punishing impulse. So I think that's different from any of the other interpretations I was mentioning, or it could just be grammatically Satan with a capital S. I don't think it's easy though for Bible readers here who are really very intent on getting every detail sorted out and making sure there seem to be no contradictions in the text to merely say that these two texts are saying the same thing. Satan, the Lord, what's the difference? I mean, it would seem that there would be a big difference here. So I think the way that one has to go with this, at least from a kind of Christian interpretive theological perspective that I share, which is open to lots of ways to reading scripture to kind of get to the same inspired endpoint for the Bible, for Christian life and faith, would be to say that the chronicler has to have space here to make his own interpretive moves and to tell the story a little bit differently. And we just have to accept here that the Bible is giving us a little tweak on this theme, even if it causes us some consternation or some ambiguity. But maybe we want to leave still this idea of the fully developed pitchfork wielding king of hell, horns on his head version of Satan, or however you want to picture it, right? Leaving that out of it in Chronicles and seeing instead here the chronicler making some kind of move toward distancing David from this. He's making an interpretation. He's reading Samuel and thinking, well, what does this mean? How can this mean what I think it means with relation to who David is? So in a sense, you could say that scripture here sets up an interpretive framework for us, at least within the boundaries of scripture itself, if not for our own selves, to be very creative with the way that a problem like this could be solved.